My friends, there are moments in history when nations don't just participate, they lead. When courage outweighs caution and vision rises above doubt. The Alaska Summit was one such moment. India didn't arrive there as a silent observer. It came with purpose, with the confidence of a nation that knows its time has come. In a world divided by uncertainty, India chose clarity. Where others saw competition, India saw collaboration. Where others spoke of power, India spoke of partnership. At that summit, India's bold move wasn't just about policy, it was about principle, standing firm for fairness, for global balance, for the right of every nation, big or small, to shape its destiny. And make no mistake, that stance changed the conversation. It reminded the world that leadership isn't about dominance, it's about direction. India's message was clear: the future will not be written by the few, but by the many. The tables of power are shifting, and they are shifting toward inclusion, innovation, and integrity. The Alaska Summit changed global politics, not because of what was signed on paper, but because of what was ignited in spirit, a belief that India's rise is not a threat to the world, but a promise to it. India's emergence as a decisive global leader was not born out of chance. It was the result of decades of persistence, vision, and strategic evolution. The Alaska Summit became the moment when that leadership crystallized before the eyes of the world. For years, India had been seen as an important player, respected, but often viewed through the lens of potential rather than power. But in Alaska, that perception changed. India no longer arrived at international forums to simply respond to agendas shaped elsewhere. It came to define the agenda. At the summit, India's representatives spoke with clarity, conviction, and confidence. Their message was not one of alignment or opposition, but of direction. India's leadership reflected a deep understanding that the future of global politics could no longer be dictated by a few dominant voices. It demanded inclusivity and cooperation. This shift in tone was powerful. It wasn't about demanding respect. It was about commanding it through integrity and vision. India showcased how far it had come from a nation seeking recognition to one shaping global consensus. This was leadership that didn't rely on dominance, but on the strength of ideas. India demonstrated it could bridge divides between the East and West, the developed and the developing, the powerful and the emerging. It became a voice of balance amid polarization, leading not by force but by example. At the Alaska Summit, India's approach stood out not merely for its strategy, but for its courage. The courage to uphold truth in an environment of pressure and politics. In a setting where powerful nations often dictated the conversation, India refused to conform. It didn't come to echo others' voices, it came to speak its own. India's courage was not combative, it was conviction with composure. It spoke of justice when others spoke of advantage, of fairness when others sought control. In doing so, India reminded the world that courage and diplomacy isn't about confrontation, it's about standing firm for what is right, even when it's inconvenient. India questioned outdated hierarchies that divided nations into the powerful and the powerless. It demanded equality, respect, and the recognition that progress cannot be monopolized. This courage was rooted in vision, to challenge, not to destroy, but to rebuild a more balanced world. By standing apart, India stood taller. By daring to differ, it became a voice of moral strength in an age of political compromise. At the heart of India's performance in Alaska lay a deeper truth. It placed principles before power. In a time when global diplomacy often serves ambition over ethics, India chose the harder, nobler path. It refused to see diplomacy as a tool for dominance, but as a platform for justice. While others spoke of influence, India spoke of integrity. It defended equitable trade, sustainable development, and global reform, not for its own gain, but for the world's good. In doing so, India reminded the world that leadership built on fairness lasts longer than authority built on fear. India's calm, disciplined diplomacy reflected a belief that real strength comes from restraint. It didn't raise its voice to command attention. It earned it through wisdom and consistency. In Alaska, India bridged the growing divide between East and West, not as a follower of either, but as a friend to both. It was a symbol of diplomacy that prefers reason over rhetoric, balance over bias, and purpose over pride. The Alaska Summit also marked a turning point in the idea of global inclusion, and India led that charge. For too long, world decisions were shaped by a handful of powers. But in Alaska, India stood for the billions whose voices had been left unheard. It didn't claim space, it created space. India reminded the world that the future cannot be built by the few for the few. It must be shaped by all, big nations and small, developed and developing, powerful and emerging. The spirit of inclusion that India brought to the table was transformative. Its message was that prosperity is sustainable only when it is shared. This vision reflected India's own democratic character, unity born from diversity, strength born from dialogue. India's call for reform in global institutions wasn't an act of defiance, it was an appeal for fairness. It asked a simple but powerful question. How can we talk about a global order when half the world isn't even at the table? In Alaska, India became the voice of those waiting to be heard, and through it, the world heard a new kind of leadership, one that uplifts rather than dominates. India's rise has often sparked both curiosity and caution, but at Alaska, it delivered a message that silenced all doubt. Its rise is not a threat to the world, but a promise of balance, stability, and partnership. India's growth is not meant to eclipse others, it's meant to enlighten a global path toward shared prosperity. India's diplomacy was anchored in partnership, not polarity. It extended hands across continents, building bridges where walls once stood. Its leadership was calm, principled, and deeply human, the kind that replaces rivalry with respect. At Alaska, India's actions carried a message. True leadership does not divide, it unites. India's rise brings with it a new form of power, not power that dominates, but power that dignifies. It reminded the world that growth can be inclusive, strength can be peaceful, and progress can be shared. The world saw that India's ascent was not a challenge to the old order, but an opportunity for a fairer one. And from all of this emerged something larger, the spirit of a new era. The Alaska Summit wasn't just an event, it was a turning point in the story of global cooperation. For the first time in years, nations left a summit not with suspicion, but with a spark of renewed faith. India's presence brought a warmth that pierced through the cold formality of international politics. It reintroduced empathy into diplomacy, reminding the world that behind every policy are people, behind every border are dreams. It spoke of humanity, of shared responsibility, and of a collective destiny that no single nation can shape alone. This was not just politics, it was purpose. A purpose that replaced fear with hope, rivalry with respect, and division with dialogue. The Alaska Summit became the birthplace of a new diplomatic spirit, one inspired by India's vision of unity and guided by its timeless belief. The world is one family, and so as the world reflects on what truly transpired in Alaska, one truth stands taller than the rest. A new chapter has begun, a chapter where courage replaces caution, where unity outweighs rivalry, and where purpose guides power. India did not just speak that day, it inspired. It did not demand attention, it earned respect. The Alaska Summit will be remembered not for the cold winds outside, but for the warmth of conviction that filled the room, the warmth of a nation that reminded the world that progress is strongest when shared and peace is lasting when built together. Let this moment stand as a reminder that leadership is not about conquering others, but about lifting others. That the true measure of strength is not how high a nation rises alone, but how many it brings along the way. In Alaska, India didn't just change the course of a summit, it changed the rhythm of global politics. It lit a flame of hope that will burn far beyond those icy borders, a flame that says to every nation, the future belongs to those who build, not those who divide. Thank you.